Hello to everyone. Welcome to Read Aloud. Today we'll be starting the final chapters of Flat Stanley. Let's get started.
Mountie Martin, Chapter 5. The next morning, Stanley and Nick said goodbye to their hosts and found the dog sled team in the village. There was only one seat, so Stanley gamely volunteered to ride flat under everyone's feet. The ride was bumpy, but every time he was tempted to complain, Stanley recalled the magical sky he and Nick had seen. At last, they arrived at the city of Calgary. The dog sled driver dropped them off at the address Tulik had provided. Stanley and Nick knocked. When the door opened, Nick cried out, "This must be the wrong address. We're looking for Tulik's cousin. Cousin Tulik sent you? Well, come on in, little partners. This is the spot, all right." "But how come you're not? How come you look like a cowboy?" Nick demanded a little rudely. It must be said. And native people can't be cowboys? Is that it? Well, guess again, little partner. This is Calgary, the Wild West, Canada. I'm Naja, and I'm Inuit, and I'm also a cowboy. Now come on. Come on in from the cold and meet my family. I guess I shouldn't have been surprised that a cousin of Tulik would be a cowboy, Stanley said thoughtfully, after being introduced to Naja's wife and children. A girl I met at Mount Rushmore, Calamity Jasper, taught me that anyone could be a cowboy. She was part of Lakota Sioux. A smile came to Stanley's face, remembering her. "She taught me some other things, too," he said. "Do you have a rope I can borrow?" Nigel brought a length of rope, and then Stanley entertained everyone with lorate tricks the cowgirl had shown him. Nick sat in a corner scowling. "Nobody likes a show off, he muttered. Just then a knock came at the door. There on the steps stood a man with a bright red coat, a big tin hat, and tall brown boots. He towered over everyone, so straight and powerful looking. Stanley wondered for a minute if he was real. Naja gave the man a big bear hug. "Monty Martin, what are you doing here so far from Quebec?" "Working. My partner and I chase a dangerous desperado out here. I figured. I'm so close to mon cher cousin, I might as well stop by for a quick, no?" "You're Naja's cousin too? And Tulik's?" asked Nick. "We, the French Canadian side of the family by marriage, Mountie Martin at your service." He saluted to the boys. "And who might you be?" The boys introduced themselves and explained they were trying to get to Niagara Falls. Then Stanley asked what he was dying to know. "This dangerous desperado you were chasing, did you get him?" The Mountie beamed. "But of course I got him, mon ami," he cried. "I am a Royal Canadian Mounted Police officer. We always get our man. Now, how would you fellows like a ride to Quebec? My partner has to fly back with a desperado, and I can use the company. I can get you a lot closer to Niagara Falls." Nick and Stanley made their goodbyes and got into Mountie Martin's cruiser. Now, Mountie made adjustments to Stanley's seatbelt until it held him snugly. "Safety first, eh? No matter the shape." Mountie Martin insisted they begin the trip with a big meal of Canadian specialties. "My treat," he said. "The United States of America is our neighbor, and I'm just being neighborly while you are visiting." The boys, having the healthy appetites that travel brings on, enjoyed everything. Stanley's favorite was poutine, French fries with cheese and gravy. "What could be better?" he asked. "Maple taffy," answered Nick. He poured more hot syrup over snow for a second helping of the sticky dessert. Back on the road, Mountie Martin was a good guide. He pointed out mountains, rivers, cities as they covered the vast and beautiful lands of Canada. All the sights seemed to remind him of a story or interesting bit of history. Whatever he said, Nick seemed to already know about it. On the second day, the conversation turned to sports. "Canada was a good choice for the 2010 Olympic Games," Mountie Martin said. "We are a nation of winter sport lovers." At that, Nick listed all his favorite sports: skiing, skating, luging, and snowboarding. Nick was an expert at everything. Stanley slid down in his seat and stared out the window. At least he thought, at least with every minute, we were getting closer to Niagara Falls and closer to home. "How about you, Stanley?" Mountie Martin interrupted his thoughts. "What's your favorite team?" "Excuse me?" "We were talking about hockey here in Canada. It's our national sport, the greatest sport in the history of the world. Stanley slid even further down in his seat. I've never seen a game, he mumbled almost to himself. I'm a huge fan, Nick exclaimed. I've been to lots of games. Mounting Mountain braked abruptly, but with caution and complete control. He pulled the cruiser over to the shoulder of the road and snapped the flashing lights on. Safety first, he exclaimed. Now would you please say that again, young man? Nick beamed. I said I've been to lots of hockey games. I'm the biggest fan. No, not you, the Mountie said. He nodded to Stanley. You, mon ami. What did you say? Stanley felt himself blush with embarrassment. I've never been to a hockey game, he admitted. Well, said Mountie, here in Canada, that's a very serious offense. A crime. And since I'm a sworn officer of the law, I cannot let this crime continue. I'm afraid I'm going to have to arrest you and take you to a... Stanley gulped, waiting for his punishment. A hockey game. Although Mountie Martin said this in a stern voice, he wore a big smile. In the back seat, Stanley grinned and saluted. Yes, sir, Mountie Martin, sir. I'm sorry for breaking the law. No fair, cried Nick. I'm a bigger fan than he is. Mountie Martin turned to face Nick. A team that competes with itself is not a very strong team, you understand, we? We, Nick said. Nick asked, you mean Stanley and me? Do we understand? No, Mountie Martin began. We means yes in French. But we, I do mean you and Stanley. Look, you tell me stories about snowboarding as a pair, traveling across Canada together, flying through the air, relying upon each other. You make your way back across the whole country again. Because you are a team. Why must you always compete? In the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, we learn to rely on our partners. We must be we. Now, if you're ready to be a real team, I think I will take you both to the hockey game tonight. Sure, for a hockey game, we'll be a team. Nick smiled, but Stanley noticed he had crossed his fingers. Chapter 6, the Stanley Cup. That night, as promised, Mountie Martin stopped in Ottawa and took the boys to a hockey game. The Maple Leafs are playing. They're my favorite team, even though I'm from Quebec, he admitted. The game was as thrilling as Stanley has always heard. At halftime, a contest was announced. The fan with the best sign will be invited down to the ice and given one chance to score a goal. If the fan made the shot, a 1 in 100 chance, he or she would win the trip to the Maple Leafs next game, which was in Toronto. Toronto! Stanley looked around at the packed stadium. Hundreds of fans were waving signs. Stanley had a terrific idea. Do you think you can bring me up if I stand on your shoulders? He asked Nick. Nick flexed his muscle. Of course. I'm probably the strongest kid here. He caught Mountie Mountain's warning look, and he said, well, you are pretty strong too, Stanley. He made a step out of his hands. Here, I'll give you a boost. Not yet, said Stanley. He pulled his red scarf way down over his face and pulled his red turtleneck up to meet it. And then, to Nick and Mountie Martin's amazement, he folded his upper body into a perfect maple leaf. He pleated his legs in their brown pants into a stem. I learned origami while I was in Japan not long ago, came Stanley's muffled voice from somewhere inside the leaf. Now hoist me up, Nick. Nick did, and the crowd went wild. There's our winner, shouted the announcer. No question at all. Come on down to the ice. Nick, holding the Stanley Maple Leaf, up in triumph, made his way down to the rink. Surrounded by the admiring crowd, when he reached the center line, Stanley jumped down and unfurled himself, and the fans went wild. When the applause finally died down, the captain of the Maple Leafs skated over and handed Nick a puck and a hockey stick. Stanley whispered something to Nick. Then Nick handed the puck back to the team captain. No thanks, he said. We'll use our own. And then Stanley lay down on the ice and coiled himself into a tight disc. Nick took aim and swung the hockey stick hard, whacking Stanley on the soles of his boots. Stanley skittered crazily across the ice. He was hurling up the sideline, nowhere near the goal. Stanley quickly calculated the angle and adjusted himself. When he hit the boards, he ricocheted off, now aiming right for the goal. yelled the announcer. Go, yelled the announcer. I don't believe my eyes, but these two boys have just done the impossible. You did the impossible, Stanley, Nick said when Stanley uncoiled himself. Monty Martin was right. We really do make a good team. The captain of the team skated over and shook both boys' hands. He handed them box seats, tickets, and airline tickets. See you in Toronto, he said. Chapter 7, Over the Falls. The next morning, bright and early, Stanley and Nick bid goodbye to Monty Martin at the airport and boarded the plane. Whatever happens at Niagara Falls, they told each other, we're already like brothers. The flight was pleasant, but with nothing to distract them, both boys began to worry about their family. Again, where had they gone? How would they ever be reunited? By the time they landed, Stanley and Nick were very homesick indeed. An airport shuttle bus whisked them to Niagara Falls. As soon as they stepped off the bus, the boys heard the powerful waterfalls crashing in the distance. They couldn't see anything except a great cloud of misty spray, though. They headed for the sound along with a crush of tourists. As they walked, the boys passed several signs. Look, Nick, Stanley pointed one out. The falls are more than 170 feet high. 150,000 gallons of water goes over the crest line every second. Nick read on another. Just then the mist cleared. The boys stared in wonder at the majestic sight of the Niagara Falls, thundering beside them a curtain of rainbows. Nick ran to the railing. Come here, Stanley, he cried over the roaring. It's awesome. Stanley rushed to catch up. When he reached the edge, he began to flap in the wind, and the winds churned up by the rushing water. How could he have forgotten his problem with the wind so soon? A sudden gust lifted him and plastered him to a signpost, dangerously close to the edge. Stanley tried to slither down, but the wind held him tight. Nick climbed onto the rail to try to peel him off. You're the first friend I've ever had, he cried. The only one who's put up with my bragging. I'm not going to lose you now. But as he struggled to push Stanley down to safety, Nick lost his footing on the mist-slick metal. Over the railing he went, hurtling through the air straight for the crashing waterfalls below. Stanley didn't think for a second. He launched himself out, reached Nick in midair, and curved himself around his new friend like a barrel. Together they crashed into the churning water, over and over and over. They smashed and battered against the rocks and angry waters. Finally, the terrible tumbling stopped, and all was still blackness. Chapter 8, Together Again. Stanley awoke to find his parents' faces hovering above him. He rubbed his eyes. Was this a dream, or was he dead? Was this a dream, or worse, was he dead? My goodness, dear, you gave us quite a fright, said his mother. Mom, Dad, what are you doing here? Stanley asked. Don't you remember? Mr. Lambchop asked. When you were up so high at the snowboarding championship, you kept yelling, "We're going to the falls. We're going to the falls." We would have never allowed it if we'd known you were planning to go into the falls, though. We just thought you'd meet us here for the wedding. What? No, that was Nick. He was yelling. Oh, never mind. The important thing is that you're here. I'm so glad to see you. But hey, where's Nick? Hay is for horses, dear, Mrs. Lambchop reminded him. Do try to remember that Nick is over there. His father is examining him now. Dr. Dave came over then. My boy's fine, he said. How about I take a look at yours, Lambchop? Please do, said Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop at the same time. Dr. Dave gave Stanley a thorough examination. Then he called Stanley problems back over. No broken bones. That's a good news, he began. Oh dear, Mrs. Lambchop exclaimed. If there's bad news, you better give it to us right away. Delaying it won't make it any easier, Harriet. Harriet Lambchop was both very practical and very brave. Well, here it is, then, Dr. Dave said. The repeated violent impact of the rushing water has flattened your son. Water trauma can do that. That's why you don't see anyone swimming around here. I can tell how long the flatness will last, but you should be prepared for the worst. But, Dr. Dave, Stanley was flat before all of this, Mrs. Lambchop said. So if that's all, then he's fine. Dr. Dave patted Miss Lambchop's hand. Denial, very common in cases like this. You just kept thinking whatever you need to think in order to get through it. Well, I must be off. Nick and I have a wedding to go to. Why, so do we, Mrs. Lambchop said. I know a lot of people get married at Niagara Falls, but do you suppose it's the same wedding? Wonder of wonders, it was. The bride was an old college chum of Nick's mother, Shelby Smith. The groom was an old college chum of Stanley's father, Ralph Jones. Their family sat on different sides of the aisle, but Stanley watched the pride as his new friend Nick carried the ring for the bride and groom. Afterwards, at the reception, Stanley, Nick, and Arthur had a wonderful time together. Dr. Dave had been right about Arthur's ankle, a few days of rest, and it was good as new. After a while, Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop came over to fetch the boys. It's time we congratulate the newlyweds. As they walked over, Stanley told Nick about the groom. Mr. Jones had a remarkable memory. He never forgets anything. And sure enough, when they reached Mr. Jones, he astonished them with his perfect recall. Hello there, Stanley, he said. What do you hear from Egypt? And sure enough, when they reached Mr. Jones, he astonished them with his perfect recall. Hello there, Stanley, he said. What do you hear from Egypt? That Sir Abudadi Shinti Hawar IV is still in prison for trying to rob the tomb. The tomb of Pharaoh Khufufu. Mr. Lambchop came up then. Congratulations, Ralph, he said, shaking his friend's hand. That wonderful memory of yours should make for a happy marriage, I predicted. At least you'll never forget your anniversary. Let's hope so, Ralph Jones said. But you know my excellent memory is the very thing that kept me from marrying Shelby years ago. Here he paused to gaze down at his bride fondly. All the time apart. What a waste, he sighed. What happened? Stanley asked. We went to high school together. I remember that once at a football game, Shelby had smiled fetchingly at the star quarterback. His name was B.F. Wellington. Big fellow. Everyone called him Beef. Beef Wellington. Get it? Har har. Except my heart was broken. Shelby had smiled at him. Not me. For all those years, Shelby denied it. But then finally she admitted she had smiled at him, but only to make me jealous. So I forgave her and asked her to be my bride. The new Mr. and Mrs. Jones kissed each other then. In a marriage, Mrs. Lambchop advised the groom, forgiveness is much more important than memory. That sounds like good advice, Mr. Jones. I'll try to remember that. That evening, the Lambchops enjoyed the Maple Leafs game very much, but all four of them agreed they were even happier to return home that evening. Stanley thumbtacked a newspaper clipping to the bulletin board over his bed. Over the falls is no barrel of laughs for two brave boys, read the headline. That was quite a vacation, Stanley said. I wish you could have made the trip with me, though, Arthur. It was my fault, Arthur said. I was showing off on the ski slope. And Stanley, I'm sorry for all the teasing about your shape. That's all right, Stanley replied. Actually, it's kind of flattering. He turned off the lamp, and the two brothers lay in their beds chuckling for a minute about Stanley's joke, and they fell fast asleep. The end.